6 years ago today, on the 31st of July 2020, Aliens Explored released its very first episodes. At that point, the Pentagon had only recently officially released 3 now famous United States Navy videos showing objects that remained unidentified. Now, imagine that someone had told Neil and I what would happen over the following 6 years. That we would see official UAP task forces established within the American government. That Congress would hold public hearings devoted entirely to the subject. That former military pilots and an intelligence officer would testify under oath. That NASA would conduct its own independent UAP study. That senior politicians would introduce legislation specifically intended to uncover government records related to unidentified anomalous phenomena, and that by 2026 the American government would be releasing batches of UAP-related documents and discussing the waiving of non-disclosure agreements for potential whistleblowers. I think we would probably have assumed that by now the mystery would have been solved. And yet 6 years later, we're still asking essentially the same question. What exactly is behind the UAP phenomenon? So on the 6th anniversary of Aliens Explored, I want to look back at 6 of the biggest turning points of those 6 years and ask whether we have really moved any closer to the truth. Hello and welcome to a slightly different episode of Aliens Explored. I'm Stu Jackson and Neil unfortunately isn't able to join me for this particular episode, but I didn't want the 6th anniversary of the podcast to pass without taking a moment to acknowledge it. Now, this is not intended to be a complete history of everything that has happened within the UAP subject since 2020, and we'd be here for several hours if I attempted that. Instead, I've collected 6 moments that I think significantly changed either the subject itself, the public conversation surrounding it, or the way governments and scientific institutions approached it. After looking at each one, I'll return to our central question. After 6 years, has anything really changed? When Aliens Explored began, one of the biggest stories in the subject was the official release of 3 American Navy videos, commonly known as Tic Tac, Gimbal and Go Fast. The footage itself had already circulated publicly. What changed in April 2020 was that the United States Department of Defense formally authorized its release. The Pentagon confirmed that one video had been recorded in November 2004 and the other 2 in January 2015. Crucially, it also said that the aerial phenomena shown in those videos remained characterized as unidentified. Now, it's important to remember what the Pentagon did and did not say. It confirmed that the footage was genuine military footage. It confirmed that the objects had not been identified. It did not confirm that they were extraterrestrial spacecraft, advanced non-human technology, or anything else quite so dramatic. But even with that qualification, that was a significant moment. The argument was no longer about whether somebody had created a convincing fake video on their laptop. The footage had an authenticated military origin, and the objects within it had not been satisfactorily identified by the department releasing it. A few months later, in August 2020, the Department of Defense announced the establishment of the United Aerial Phenomena Task Force. Its stated mission was to detect, analyse and catalogue UAP that could potentially pose a threat to American national security. That was one of the first subjects we covered on Aliens Explored. Now, for those watching on YouTube, a link to our original Pentagon video episode should be appearing on screen now. For everybody listening through Spotify or an audio podcast service, that episode is linked in the description below. Now, looking back, I think this was the moment when the modern UAP conversation acquired official legitimacy. It didn't prove that anybody was being visited by extraterrestrials, but what it did prove was that unidentified objects were being reported and recorded in military airspace, and that the United States government considered the issue serious enough to investigate. That was progress. But it was only the beginning. In June 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence published its preliminary assessment of unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP. For many people, myself included, expectations were extraordinarily high. Some expected a major disclosure event. Others believed that the report might finally explain the Navy encounters or reveal what the American government secretly knows. What appeared was a document of only 9 pages. But those 9 pages contained some important admissions. The assessment examined 144 reports originating from United States government sources. 80 of those reports involved observations made using multiple sensors. Now, Neil and I discussed the assessment in a special live episode of Aliens Explored shortly after its release. YouTube viewers should see a link on screen now, while Spotify and audio listeners can find the episode in the description. Only one case was identified with high confidence as a large deflating balloon. The others remained unexplained within the available data. The report also stated that in 18 incidents described across 21 reports, observers had reported unusual movement patterns or flight characteristics. These reportedly included objects remaining stationary against winds, moving abruptly or travelling at considerable speed without an obvious means of propulsion. But, and this qualification is absolutely essential, the report also said that further rigorous analysis was needed to establish the nature and validity of that data. That combination has defined much of the UAP debate ever since. There was enough information to justify further investigation, but not enough to establish a conclusion. There were observations that appeared unusual, but the available data was often incomplete. And there were many unexplained cases, but unexplained did not automatically mean unexplainable. And it certainly did not automatically mean extraterrestrial. The significance of the report was therefore not that it provided an answer, it was that the American intelligence community publicly acknowledged that it did not possess satisfactory answers for the majority of the cases it had examined. Now, in the old UFO world, uncertainty was often treated as something embarrassing that should be dismissed or hidden. But by 2021, uncertainty itself had become an official finding. The next major development came in 2022, when the subject began acquiring permanent political and bureaucratic machinery. On the 17th of May, a subcommittee of the House Intelligence Committee held a public hearing entitled Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. Senior defence and intelligence officials were questioned publicly, footage was shown, and the subject was discussed not as entertainment or folklore, but as a matter of intelligence, aviation safety and national security. Then, in July, the Department of Defence established the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, mercifully abbreviated to AARO. AARO's remit extended beyond objects seen in the atmosphere. It included unidentified objects in space, in the air, underwater, and those apparently moving between different environments. Its stated responsibilities included collecting reports, analysing incidents, and attempting to identify and attribute objects that could threaten military operations or national security. Now, the creation of a government office is not particularly exciting television. It lacks the drama of a leaked video or an extraordinary whistleblower allegation. But institutionally, it mattered. A temporary task force can quietly expire. A permanent office created through legislation with reporting responsibilities and congressional scrutiny is considered harder to make disappear. And of course, the more sceptical interpretation is that bureaucracy can also absorb an uncomfortable issue. It can create processes, classifications, reports and acronyms without necessarily producing meaningful transparency. And that tension between genuine investigation and bureaucratic containment would become increasingly important. But nevertheless, by the end of 2022, UAP investigation was no longer an occasional side project. It had become part of the official machinery of the United States government. Then came the event that pushed the modern UAP story into an entirely new territory. On the 26th of July 2023, Ryan Graves, retired Navy Commander David Fravor and former intelligence officer David Grush appeared before the United States House of Representatives. It's worth distinguishing between the three men because they brought three very different forms of testimony. Ryan Graves concentrated heavily upon the experiences of military and commercial pilots, the stigma surrounding UAP reporting, and the potential danger unidentified objects could present to aviation. He argued that pilots were encountering unidentified objects but were often reluctant to report them because they feared ridicule or damage to their careers. David Fravor gave a first-hand account of the 2004 Nimitz Tic Tac encounter. He described seeing a white, wingless object manoeuvring above disturbed water before rapidly accelerating away. Fravor and other aviators witnessed the object directly, while associated contacts were also reportedly recorded by military sensor systems. And then there was David Grush. Now, David Grush told Congress that during his intelligence work, he had been informed of what he described as a long-running UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program operating without appropriate congressional oversight. His public testimony was based substantially upon information he said he had been supplied to him by current and former military intelligence personnel, along with material he said he had attempted to corroborate during his official duties. These were extraordinary allegations, but testimony, even testimony delivered under oath, is not the same as independently verifiable physical evidence, as Neil often reminds us. Grush's appearance did not prove the existence of recovered non-human craft. What it did was place those allegations formally before Congress, voiced by a former intelligence officer who said he had pursued the appropriate whistleblowing channels. That distinction matters. It was simultaneously one of the most significant moments in modern UAP history, and a moment that left the public evidence gap unresolved. Now, Neil and I discussed the hearing in a special Aliens Explored episode shortly afterwards. For YouTube viewers, that link is appearing now. For everyone else, it's included in the description. Whatever your opinion of the witnesses or their claims, the hearing transformed the political conversation. The question was no longer limited to, what are the pilots seeing? It had expanded to, could government programs, materials or information be concealed from elected representatives responsible for overseeing them? That made the UAP disclosure an issue of democratic accountability even before the extraterrestrial question could be answered. Over the following months, three very different approaches to the subject collided. First came NASA. In September 2023, NASA's independent study team published its final report on UAP. The study was not an investigation intended to prove or disprove extraterrestrial visitation. Its focus was upon the quality of the available data, how future information could be collected, and how scientific analysis could be improved. That may have disappointed anyone hoping NASA would unveil photographs of an alien spacecraft, but scientifically, it was an important shift. A major scientific institution was publicly saying that UAP could be examined seriously, provided that the subject was approached using reliable data, appropriate instruments, and proper scientific standards. At approximately the same time, Senators Chuck Schumer and Mike Rounds introduced the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023. The original proposal called for government UAP records to carry a presumption of disclosure and proposed a formal review process modelled partly upon the system created for records concerning the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Several of its strongest provisions did not survive the final legislative process, although some disclosure requirements remained. And that was frustrating, but the very existence of the proposal was extraordinary. Senior politicians from both major American parties were no longer merely asking for another report. They were proposing legislation specifically designed to uncover and release historical UAP records. Then, in March 2024, Arrow published the first volume of its historical record report. Arrow said that it had found no evidence that a United States government investigation or official review had confirmed a UAP as extraterrestrial technology. It also said that it had found no empirical evidence supporting claims that the government or private companies had secretly been reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. Its conclusion was that most sightings resulted from ordinary objects, natural phenomena, or misidentification, and that many unresolved cases lacked sufficient quality data for a reliable determination. Critics disputed Arrow's methods, its access to witnesses, and the completeness of its investigation. Supporters argued that it represented the most comprehensive official review yet conducted of historic crash retrieval allegations. And there, in a single period, you had the modern UAP debate in miniature. NASA said that better scientific data was required. Politicians attempted to force greater disclosure. Whistleblowers and advocates alleged hidden programs, and the Pentagon's official investigative office said it had found no empirical evidence that those programs involved extraterrestrial technology. Now, we examined that collision of science, legislation and official pushback in another Aliens Explored episode, which is linked on screen for YouTube viewers and in the description for everyone listening. More attention had undoubtedly been directed towards the phenomenon, but agreement about what the evidence actually demonstrated appeared further away than ever. And that brings us to 2026. This year, the American government launched the Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP Encounters, PURSUE, and began releasing batches or tranches of historical UAP records. The first tranche was published on the 8th of May, with the fourth arriving on the 10th of July. The releases have included historical documents, photographs and military videos that members of the public can examine for themselves. Some material is undoubtedly interesting. Some provides useful historical context. Some cases remain unresolved. But so far, the releases have not produced a single item that has been universally accepted as definitive proof of non-human technology. And only this week, another potential significant development emerged. Congressman Eric Burleson announced that President Trump had directed the relevant defense and intelligence agencies to waive certain previous non-disclosure agreements for individuals possessing relevant UAP information. Burleson also said that detailed guidance explaining how the process would operate was still expected from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. That could become extremely important. If people genuinely possess protected information concerning UAP-related programs, removing legal barriers might allow them to speak more openly. But the real test will not be the announcement. It'll be what happens next. Do witnesses come forward? Are they able to provide first-hand information? And can documents, materials or data be independently verified? And will Congress and the public be allowed to examine the evidence rather than simply hear another sequence of claims about evidence that remains classified? Those are the questions that will determine whether this latest development represents a genuine breakthrough or simply another promising moment followed by disappointment. We've covered both the pursued releases and the NDA development in recent Aliens Explored episodes. Those are also linked in the description. So after all of that, has UFO disclosure genuinely progressed? I think the honest answer is yes, but perhaps not in the way many people, myself included, had hoped. We've not received an official confirmation that extraterrestrial or non-human intelligence is visiting Earth. We've not been shown a recovered spacecraft. We've not seen biological material presented for open scientific examination. And we still do not possess enough publicly available evidence to reach a definitive conclusion about the most extraordinary claims. But it would be equally wrong to say that nothing has changed. The stigma surrounding the subject has not disappeared, but it has weakened. Military pilots have testified openly. Members of Congress now discuss UAP without automatically treating the subject as a joke. NASA has acknowledged that unidentified phenomena can be a legitimate subject for scientific study. Permanent reporting and investigative structures now exist. Legislation has been written specifically to release UAP records, and government agencies are being placed under increasing pressure to explain what information they possess and why some of it remains classified. 6 years ago, the central battle was often simply persuading people that there was a genuine subject worthy of investigation. Today, that point is considerably harder to dismiss. The argument has moved on to the quality of the evidence, the effectiveness of the investigations, and the degree of transparency governments are genuinely willing to provide. Personally, 6 years of covering this subject have not made me less interested. They've made me more cautious about easy answers. You see, being open-minded does not mean accepting every claim. And for Neil, being sceptical does not mean dismissing every witness. An unresolved incident is not proof of an alien spacecraft, but neither should a genuinely unexplained incident be forced into an explanation simply because uncertainty makes us uncomfortable. The responsible position lies somewhere between belief and dismissal. It means following the evidence, recognising its limitations, and being willing to change our conclusions when better information becomes available. And that, ultimately, has always been the purpose of Aliens Explored. Neil and I don't always approach every case from precisely the same position. That's part of the programme's strength. We question the witnesses. We question official explanations. We question extraordinary claims. And perhaps most importantly, we question ourselves. 6 years is a considerable amount of time for any podcast to exist, particularly one that's gone through different formats, pauses, returns, and more technical difficulties than I care to remember. So, whether you discovered us 6 years ago or 6 days ago, or this is the first episode you've seen, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, commenting, and continuing to explore this extraordinary subject alongside us. As Aliens Explored enters its 7th year, we will continue examining the latest news, reopening important historical cases, investigating new ones, and helping newcomers understand the often bewildering world of UFOs and UAP. But now I want to hear from you. Of all the developments we've discussed today, which do you believe genuinely changed the UAP conversation? And after 6 years of hearings, reports, whistleblowers and promises of disclosure, do you believe that we're really any closer to understanding what is behind the phenomenon? Let me know in the comments or contact us through the usual Aliens Explored channels. Links to all the episodes mentioned today can be found in the description, regardless of whether you're watching on YouTube, Spotify or listening through your preferred podcast service. Thank you once again for supporting Aliens Explored over the last 6 years. I'm Stu Jackson. Neil will be back with me soon, and we will see you next time. In the meantime, keep watching the skies. Take care.